But Maya's success came at a personal cost. The defense contractor community had mobilized against her, using their political connections and financial influence to argue that she represented an unacceptable risk to program stability and contractor relationships. Pressure was building for the Air Force to terminate her contract and return to more traditional safety oversight procedures. The pressure reached its peak when Maya was assigned to investigate a series of accidents involving the new F-35 fighter aircraft. The F-35 program was the most expensive military aircraft program in history, involving multiple international partners and representing decades of development work. Any safety issues Maya identified would have implications that extended far beyond the United States. Air Force Maya approached the F-35 investigation with the same methodical precision she had brought to every other assignment, but she also understood that this investigation would likely determine whether she would continue to have a role in military aviation safety. The stakes couldn't have been higher for the F-35 program, for military aviation safety, and for Maya's own career. The investigation would test everything Maya had learned about aviation, politics, and the complex relationship between safety and institutional interests. It would also reveal whether the military aviation community had truly embraced the principle that safety should take precedence over all other considerations, or whether bureaucratic and financial pressures would ultimately prevail over technical expertise and moral courage. The F-35 investigation began with what appeared to be an isolated incident at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. Major David Kim's aircraft had experienced a complete loss of engine power during a routine training flight, forcing him to eject over the Gulf of Mexico. Kim was recovered safely by Coast Guard helicopters, but the aircraft was lost when it crashed into the ocean. The preliminary investigation attributed the accident to a catastrophic engine failure, possibly caused by foreign object damage or mechanical wear. It was the kind of accident that occasionally occurred in military aviation, unfortunate but not necessarily indicative of systematic problems. The F-35 program office issued a routine safety bulletin and continued normal operations. Maya's involvement began 3 weeks later when a second F-35 experienced engine problems during a flight at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. This time, the pilot was able to execute a successful emergency landing, and the aircraft was recovered intact. But when maintenance crews examined the engine, they found evidence of the same type of failure that had likely caused the crash at Eglin. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the F-35 program safety officer, contacted Maya directly. "Ms. Rodriguez, we've got 2 engine incidents with similar failure signatures. The manufacturer insists these are isolated events, but I'd like you to take a look at the evidence." Maya arrived at Luke Air Force Base, expecting to conduct a routine technical investigation. Instead, she found herself examining an engine failure pattern that was unlike anything she had seen before. The damaged components showed signs of stress fractures that appeared to develop over time rather than occurring suddenly, suggesting that the failures were the result of systematic design or manufacturing problems rather than random mechanical breakdowns. Maya's initial analysis revealed that both engines had been manufactured at the same facility, using the same production processes and quality control procedures. More troubling, both engines had accumulated similar flight hours and had been operated under similar mission profiles before failing. The correlation suggested that other engines manufactured under the same conditions might be approaching similar failure points. Maya requested access to the complete engine manufacturing and testing records, expecting to find documentation that would either confirm or refute her preliminary analysis. Instead, she encountered a level of classification and access restriction that was unprecedented in her experience as a safety investigator. The engine manufacturer, Consolidated Aerospace, had classified virtually all manufacturing and testing data as proprietary business information. The Air Force had signed agreements that limited access to this information to a small number of specifically authorized personnel, none of whom included independent safety investigators like Maya. Maya's request for access was denied by the F-35 Program Office, which cited contractual obligations and intellectual property protections as barriers to sharing the manufacturing data. She was told that Consolidated Aerospace's own investigation had found no systematic problems, and that the two engine failures were isolated incidents caused by operational factors rather than design or manufacturing defects Maya had encountered. Contractor resistance before, but the F-35 situation was different. The level of access restriction and the coordination between the contractor and the program office suggested that there were aspects of the engine problems that someone was determined to keep hidden. Maya decided to approach the investigation from a different angle. Instead of focusing on the restricted manufacturing data, she began analyzing the operational history of every F-35 engine in the fleet. Using her access to maintenance records and flight data, she compiled a comprehensive database of engine performance across all F-35 operations. The pattern that emerged from Maya's analysis was alarming. Engines manufactured during a specific 6-month period showed significantly higher rates of performance degradation than engines manufactured before or after that time frame. The affected engines were experiencing premature wear, unusual vibration patterns, and gradual loss of power output that preceded complete failure. Maya's analysis indicated that approximately 40 engines currently in service had been manufactured during the problematic period and were likely approaching failure conditions. The implications were staggering if her analysis was correct. The Air Force was operating aircraft with engines that could fail without warning, potentially causing multiple accidents and pilot fatalities. Maya submitted her findings to Colonel Mitchell, along with recommendations for immediate inspection of all engines manufactured during the identified time frame. Mitchell reviewed the analysis and immediately recognized its significance. Ms. Rodriguez, if your analysis is correct, we need to ground every aircraft with these engines until we can verify their condition. But I need you to understand something. Grounding 40 F-35s would have implications that extend far beyond engine safety. Maya understood the political dimensions of her findings, but she also understood her responsibility as a safety investigator. Colonel, the data clearly shows that these engines are operating outside normal parameters and approaching failure conditions. The risk of catastrophic failure is unacceptable. I agree with your technical assessment, Mitchell replied, but I need you to be prepared for the resistance you're going to encounter. The F-35 program is under intense scrutiny from Congress, international partners, and the media. Any indication of systematic problems could jeopardize the entire program. Mitchell's warning proved prescient. When Maya's findings were presented to the F-35 program office, the response was immediate and hostile. Program officials questioned Maya's methodology, challenged her access to the data she had analyzed, and suggested that her conclusions were based on incomplete information. General Thompson, the F-35 program director, convened an emergency meeting to address Maya's findings. The meeting included representatives from Consolidated Aerospace, senior Air Force officials, and officials from the Department of Defense. Maya found herself facing a room full of people who had billions of dollars and decades of career investment in the success of the F-35 program. Ms. Rodriguez, General Thompson began, your analysis has created a situation that requires immediate clarification. The contractor has reviewed your findings and disputes your conclusions. They maintain that the engines in question are operating within acceptable parameters and that no systematic problems exist. Maya had prepared for this confrontation by bringing detailed technical documentation to support every aspect of her analysis. General, the performance data clearly shows that engines manufactured during the specified timeframe are experiencing accelerated degradation. The pattern is consistent across multiple aircraft and multiple bases. The Consolidated Aerospace representative, Dr. Patricia Williams, challenged Maya's interpretation of the data. Ms. Rodriguez, your analysis fails to account for operational variables that could explain the performance variations you've identified. Differences in pilot technique, mission profiles, and environmental conditions could easily account for the patterns you've observed. 2 years after leaving the military, Maya received a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel Janet Morrison, the new commander of the 127th Special Operations Squadron, Maya's old unit, Captain Rodriguez. Morrison said, using Maya's former rank, "I need to speak with you about a matter of national security. Can you meet me tomorrow morning at Peterson Air Force Base?" Maya was curious but cautious. "Colonel, I'm no longer in the military. I'm not sure what assistance I could provide." "Ms. Rodriguez, your former squadron is facing a crisis that threatens the lives of every pilot in the unit. I need someone with your expertise to help us identify and solve the problem before we lose more people." The meeting took place in a windowless conference room that Maya remembered well from her own military days. Colonel Morrison was younger than Maya had expected, with the bearing of someone who had earned her position through competence rather than politics. Also present were Major Thompson, whom Maya recognized as one of the pilots from her original squadron, and a civilian investigator from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. "Ms. Rodriguez," Morrison began, "since you left the Air Force, the 127th has experienced 6 aircraft accidents in 18 months. 4 pilots have been killed, and 2 others have been permanently disabled. The accidents appear unrelated, different aircraft types, different mission profiles, different weather conditions, but our investigators suspect there's a common factor." Maya studied the accident reports that Morrison placed on the table. Even a cursory review revealed patterns that should have been obvious to any competent investigator. "Colonel, these accidents all involve aircraft that were recently upgraded with new avionics systems. Have you investigated the installation procedures?" "That's why you're here," Morrison replied. "The official investigation found no problems with the avionics installations. The contractors involved have sterling reputations and perfect safety records. But Major Thompson suggested that you might see something our investigators missed." Thompson leaned forward. "Maya, I know we didn't always see eye to eye when you were in the squadron, but everyone remembers how you exposed that maintenance fraud. If there's something wrong with these aircraft, you're the person who can find it." Maya spent the next 4 hours reviewing the accident files, maintenance records, and installation documentation for the avionics upgrades. What she found was subtle but deadly, a pattern of installation errors that wouldn't be detected by standard inspection procedures, but would cause system failures under specific flight conditions. The avionics contractor had been using installation technicians who were certified for civilian aircraft, but lacked the specialized training required for military systems. The differences were minor, but critical civilian aircraft operated in controlled airspace with constant communication and navigation support, while military aircraft often flew in contested environments where electronic systems had to function independently under extreme conditions. The installation procedures are correct for civilian applications, Maya explained to the group, but they don't account for the electromagnetic interference and power fluctuations that military aircraft encounter in combat environments. The systems work perfectly under normal conditions, but they fail catastrophically when subjected to the electronic warfare countermeasures that our aircraft routinely encounter. Morrison looked at the evidence Maya had compiled. How did our investigators miss this? Because they were looking for obvious problems, faulty components, incorrect wiring, manufacturing defects. This is a systemic issue with the installation procedures themselves. The avionics systems are working exactly as designed, but they're designed for the wrong operating environment. The investigation that followed, Maya's discovery revealed that the same flawed installation procedures had been used on aircraft across multiple military units. The contractor had saved money by using civilian certified technicians instead of military qualified installers, and the cost savings had been significant enough to influence the contract award process. Maya's findings triggered a comprehensive review of avionics installations across the entire Air Force. Over 300 aircraft were grounded for reinspection and modification, and new installation procedures were implemented to ensure that military-specific requirements were properly addressed. But the most significant outcome of Maya's investigation was something she hadn't expected, a personal request from Colonel Morrison that would challenge everything Maya thought she knew about her future. "Ms. Rodriguez," Morrison said during their final meeting about the avionics investigation, "I have a proposition for you. The Air Force needs someone with your expertise to oversee aircraft safety and maintenance integrity across our special operations units. It's a civilian contractor position, which means you wouldn't have to deal with military bureaucracy, but you'd have direct access to our aircraft and personnel." Maya was intrigued but cautious. "Colonel, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure. I want to get back into military aviation. I've built a successful civilian practice." "I understand your concerns," Morrison replied. "But consider this, in civilian aviation, you can save dozens of lives by preventing accidents in individual aircraft. In military aviation, you could save hundreds of lives by improving safety across entire fleets." The position Morrison was offering was unlike anything that had existed before in military aviation. Maya would be an independent contractor with unprecedented access to aircraft maintenance records and operational procedures across multiple special operations units. She would report directly to the commanding officers of each unit, bypassing the traditional bureaucratic hierarchy that had frustrated her military career. Maya spent 2 weeks considering the offer. She consulted with colleagues in civilian aviation, reviewed the contract terms, and carefully evaluated the scope of responsibility she would be accepting. The position would require her to relocate back to Colorado and to immerse herself once again in the world of military aviation that had caused her so much frustration. But Maya also recognized that the position represented something unprecedented: opportunity to influence military aviation safety from outside the traditional command structure. With the authority to identify problems and implement solutions without political interference, she accepted Morrison's offer with one condition: that she would have complete independence to investigate any safety issue, regardless of the political implications or the cost of corrective action. Morrison agreed without hesitation. Maya's return to military aviation was announced through official channels as the appointment of a new aviation safety integration specialist, a title that obscured the revolutionary nature of her position. But word spread quickly through the pilot community that Maya Rodriguez was back, and that she had been given unprecedented authority to address safety issues. Her first assignment under the new contract took her to Hurlburt Field in Florida, where the 1st Special Operations Wing was experiencing problems with their new helicopter fleet. The aircraft were state-of-the-art machines with advanced flight control systems, but pilots were reporting control difficulties during certain maneuvers that made the aircraft dangerous to fly in combat conditions. Maya approached the problem with her characteristic thoroughness. But she also brought something new: the perspective of someone who had operated successfully outside the military bureaucracy and understood how to navigate between military requirements and civilian technical standards. The investigation at Hurlburt revealed that the helicopter problems were caused by software algorithms that had been optimized for fuel efficiency rather than combat maneuverability. The flight control systems were designed to prevent pilots from exceeding certain performance parameters, but those same parameters limited the aircraft's effectiveness in the tactical situations, where special operations helicopters were most likely to be employed. Maya's solution was elegant and practical. She worked with the manufacturer to develop new software configurations that could be selected based on mission requirements. Pilots could choose fuel-efficient algorithms for training and transportation missions, or combat-optimized algorithms for tactical operations. The success at Hurlburt led to additional assignments across the special operations community. Maya found herself traveling constantly, investigating problems and implementing solutions at bases across the country and around the world. Each assignment reinforced her reputation as someone who could identify complex technical problems and develop practical solutions. But Maya's most important assignment was yet to come, and it would test everything she had learned about aviation, investigation, and leadership in ways she never could have anticipated. The crisis that would define Maya's legacy began with a routine training exercise at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho. The 366th Fighter Wing was conducting advanced combat maneuvers when Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chun's F-16 disappeared from radar during a low-level navigation exercise. Search and rescue teams found the wreckage 8 hours later in a remote canyon, but Chun's body was never recovered from the twisted metal that had once been a state-of-the-art fighter aircraft. Maya had anticipated this argument and had specifically controlled for operational variables in her analysis. Dr. Williams, my analysis includes normalization for flight hours, mission types, and environmental conditions. The performance degradation patterns persist even after accounting for these variables. Ms. Rodriguez, you're making serious allegations about our manufacturing processes based on statistical correlations that could have multiple explanations. Without access to our proprietary manufacturing data, you cannot definitively conclude that systematic problems exist. Maya realized that she was facing the same circular logic that had frustrated her throughout her career. Access to the information needed to prove systematic problems was being denied on the grounds that systematic problems hadn't been proven to exist. The meeting continued for over 4 hours, with Maya defending her analysis against challenges from multiple directions. Program officials questioned her authority to conduct the investigation. Contractor representatives disputed her technical conclusions, and senior military officers expressed concern about the operational implications of her recommendations. Finally, General Thompson called for a decision. Ms. Rodriguez, based on the information presented today, I'm not prepared to ground aircraft based on your analysis. The contractor has provided assurances that no systematic problems exist, and the operational impact of grounding aircraft would be unacceptable without definitive proof of immediate danger. Maya felt the familiar frustration of watching bureaucratic and financial considerations override safety concerns. But she also recognized that this decision represented a fundamental test of the military's commitment to aviation safety. General, I respectfully request that my findings and recommendations be documented in the official record, along with the decision to continue operations despite identified risks. Your request is noted, Ms. Rodriguez. This meeting is concluded. As Maya left the Pentagon that evening, she understood that the F-35 investigation had reached a critical juncture. She had identified what she believed to be a serious safety problem, but the institutional resistance to addressing that problem was stronger than any she had previously encountered. Maya faced a decision that would define not only her career, but also her legacy as a safety advocate. She could accept the program office's decision and continue her work on other assignments, or she could find another way to ensure that her findings reached the people who needed to know about them, the pilots who were flying aircraft with potentially defective engines. Maya spent that night in her hotel room near the Pentagon, staring at her laptop screen filled with engine performance data that told a story no one wanted to hear. She had documented everything meticulously: the failure patterns, the manufacturing timeframes, the statistical correlations that painted a clear picture of impending catastrophe. But documentation meant nothing if the people with authority to act chose to ignore it. At 3 in the morning, Maya made a decision that would change everything. She opened her secure communication system and began sending messages to every F-35 pilot she had worked with over the years, every squadron safety officer who trusted her judgment, and every maintenance chief who understood the technical implications of what she had discovered. The messages were carefully worded to avoid violating security protocols while conveying the essential information. Maya described the engine performance patterns she had identified, the manufacturing timeframes that correlated with increased failure risk, and the specific inspection procedures that could detect early warning signs of impending failure. Maya's network had grown far beyond what anyone realized. Over 5 years of investigating safety issues across multiple bases and units, she had built relationships with hundreds of military personnel who had seen her work firsthand and understood her commitment to keeping pilots alive. These weren't just professional contacts, they were people who trusted Maya's judgment because she had consistently been right when others had been wrong. The response to Maya's messages was immediate and dramatic. Squadron commanders began quietly ordering additional inspections of their F-35 engines, focusing on the timeframes and performance parameters Maya had identified. Maintenance crews who had been told that minor performance variations were normal suddenly understood that those variations might be early indicators of catastrophic failure. Within 72 hours, Maya's informal warning network had identified 6 additional engines showing the performance degradation patterns she had documented. The engines were immediately removed from service pending detailed inspection, and what the inspections revealed confirmed Maya's worst fears. The engine showed clear evidence of internal damage that would have led to catastrophic failure within a matter of flight hours. Turbine blades were cracked, bearing surfaces showed excessive wear, and internal components displayed stress patterns that indicated imminent breakdown. Each of these engines had been cleared for operation by routine maintenance procedures, but Maya's analysis had revealed that routine procedures were inadequate for detecting the specific failure modes affecting engines from the problematic manufacturing period. Colonel Rodriguez at Nellis Air Force Base was the first to officially report findings that corroborated Maya's analysis. Command, we've identified significant internal damage in engine serial numbers 4471, 4498, and 4503. These engines were manufactured during the time frame identified in the Rodriguez analysis and show exactly the failure patterns she predicted. Reports from Nellis triggered a cascade of similar discoveries at bases across the country. F-35 squadrons that had conducted additional inspections based on Maya's warnings found engine damage that had gone undetected by standard maintenance procedures. The scope of the problem was exactly what Maya had predicted: approximately 40 engines, showing various stages of the same progressive failure pattern. The Air Force leadership found itself facing an impossible situation. Maya's unofficial warning network had effectively forced a comprehensive inspection program that revealed systematic problems in the F-35 engine fleet. The engines showing damage had to be grounded immediately, but acknowledging the scope of the problem would validate Maya's analysis and undermine the official position that no systematic problems existed. General Thompson convened an emergency meeting of the F-35 program leadership to address what he privately described as the Rodriguez situation. The meeting included the same officials who had dismissed Maya's findings 3 days earlier, but now they were confronting evidence that her analysis had been accurate. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thompson began, "we have a situation that requires immediate action and careful management. It appears that Ms. Rodriguez's analysis may have identified legitimate safety concerns, that our standard inspection procedures failed to detect. Dr. Williams from Consolidated Aerospace looked uncomfortable as she addressed the group. "General, our quality control procedures are designed to meet all contractual requirements. If additional inspection criteria are needed, we can certainly implement them, but this represents a significant change to our established processes." Colonel Mitchell, who had been receiving reports from bases across the country, provided a sobering assessment. "General, we're looking at potentially grounding 20% of the operational F-35 fleet pending engine replacement or major overhaul. The operational impact would be severe, but the alternative is accepting unacceptable risk of catastrophic engine failure." The discussion that followed revealed the complex web of interests and pressures that surrounded the F-35 program. Congressional oversight committees were demanding explanations for program delays and cost overruns. International partners were questioning American technical competence. Defense contractors were facing potential liability for systematic manufacturing defects. But underlying all of these concerns was a more fundamental issue. Maya Rodriguez, working as an independent contractor with limited resources and restricted access to information, had identified critical safety problems that had been missed by a massive bureaucracy with unlimited resources and complete access to all relevant data. General Thompson made the decision that everyone in the room understood was inevitable. "We're implementing immediate inspection requirements for all engines manufactured during the identified time frame. Aircraft with engines showing any indication of the problems Ms. Rodriguez identified will be grounded pending engine replacement." The decision to ground a significant portion of the F-35 fleet, based on Maya's analysis, sent shockwaves through the defense establishment. News of the groundings leaked to the media within hours, triggering congressional investigations and intense scrutiny of the F-35 program's management and oversight procedures. The enemy convoy was 20 miles out, closing fast. No reinforcements available. The base commander looked at his watch 4 hours until they were overrun. But then, through the static on the radio, came a voice they hadn't heard in 3 years. "This is Thunder 6. I'm coming in hot with a full payload." The communications officer went pale. "Sir, that call sign." It belonged to Captain Maya Rodriguez. She was declared killed in action 3 years ago after the training accident. Captain Maya Rodriguez had been 28 when she first walked into Camp Valor, the elite special operations training facility nestled in the Colorado mountains. The other recruits took one look at her 5'4" Latina, fresh out of the Air Force Academy, and made their assumptions. She could hear their whispers in the mess hall, see their smirks during briefings. To them, she was just another diversity hire, a checkbox for the Pentagon's inclusion metrics. The training program had a 93% failure rate. It was designed to break people, to weed out anyone who couldn't handle the pressure of leading the most dangerous missions in the military. The instructors were former Navy SEALs, Green Berets, and Delta Force operators who had zero patience for anything they perceived as weakness. Master Sergeant Williams, the head instructor, had made his position clear on the first day. "I don't care what your last name is, what color your skin is, or what's between your legs. If you can't cut it here, you're gone." Maya had listened to his speech with the same calm expression she'd worn throughout her entire military career. She'd grown up in East L.A., the daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. She'd learned early that action spoke louder than words, that respect was earned through performance, not given because of quotas or good intentions. When the other recruits were complaining about the early morning PT sessions, Maya was already in the gym at 4 a.m., pushing herself harder than anyone demanded. The first test came during the 3rd week of training. It was a navigation exercise through the mountains, carrying a 60-pound pack with only a compass and a map. The recruits had to reach 3 checkpoints spread across 20 miles of rough terrain, all within a 12-hour window. Maya had studied the topographical maps for hours, memorizing every ridgeline, every stream, every potential hazard. While her classmates were plotting the most obvious routes, she was calculating elevation changes, wind patterns, and weather conditions. When the exercise began, Maya disappeared into the wilderness like she'd been born there. She moved with a precision that came from understanding that every step, every decision, every breath mattered. The other recruits took the main trails, following well-worn paths that looked easier on the map, but were actually longer and more exposed. Maya cut through dense forest, navigated by dead reckoning when the tree cover blocked her compass readings, and reached the first checkpoint 40 minutes ahead of the next, closest recruit. But it was at the second checkpoint that something went wrong. As Maya approached the rally point, she heard something that made her blood freeze, a distress call over the radio. One of her fellow recruits, a guy named Peterson who'd been particularly vocal about her being a diversity pick, had fallen into a ravine about 2 miles off the main route. He'd been trying to take a shortcut and had lost his footing on loose rock. His leg was broken, and he was losing blood from a deep cut on his forehead. Maya faced a choice that would define not just her training, but her entire career. She could continue to the final checkpoint, secure her position as the top performer in the exercise, and let the instructors handle Peterson's rescue. Or she could abandon her own success to help someone who'd never shown her anything but disdain. Keyed her radio and called in Peterson's exact location, then changed course. When she reached the ravine, she found Peterson semi-conscious, hypothermic, and going into shock. The rescue team wouldn't reach him for at least 3 hours. Maya knew that in his condition, he might not survive that long. She rappelled down into the ravine using her climbing gear, stabilized his leg with a makeshift splint, and used her own body heat to keep him warm while they waited for evacuation. By the time the rescue helicopter arrived, Maya had missed the final checkpoint. According to the exercise rules, she had failed. But when Peterson was loaded onto the medevac, conscious and stable, he grabbed Maya's arm. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why did you help me?" Maya looked at him with those steady brown eyes that had seen too much hardship to be impressed by training exercises. "Because that's what soldiers do," she said simply. "We don't leave people behind." Master Sergeant Williams had been watching the entire scenario unfold through drone footage and radio intercepts. When Maya reported back to base, he was waiting for her. "Rodriguez," he said, "you failed the exercise. You missed the final checkpoint." "Yes, sir," Maya replied, standing at attention. "Do you know what that means?" "Yes, sir." "It means I'm out of the program." Williams studied her for a long moment. "Actually, Rodriguez, it means you just passed the real test, the one that matters." From that day forward, Maya's reputation changed. The other recruits stopped seeing her as a diversity hire and started seeing her as a soldier. But more importantly, the instructors started seeing her as a leader. She approached every challenge with the same methodical precision that had gotten her through that first navigation exercise. When they were learning close-quarters combat, she studied not just the techniques, but the psychology behind them. When they were practicing tactical planning, she didn't just memorize the playbooks, she understood the reasoning behind every decision. Maya's breakthrough came during the advanced flight training phase. The program required pilots to master multiple aircraft types, from helicopters to fighter jets to transport planes. Most recruits specialized in 1 or 2 areas, but Maya attacked each new aircraft like it was a puzzle to be solved. She studied the engineering specifications, the maintenance requirements, the performance envelope of every machine they put her in. Within 6 months, she was qualified on more aircraft types than any other recruit in the program's history. But it was her performance during the live-fire exercises that really set her apart. These were simulated combat missions using real weapons and real explosives. conducted in a sprawling training area that replicated various combat environments. The scenarios were designed to test not just flying skills, but decision-making under pressure, tactical awareness, and the ability to adapt when everything went wrong. Maya's first live-fire mission was a close air support exercise. She was flying an A-10 Warthog, providing cover for a ground team that was trying to extract a high-value target from a mock enemy compound. The exercise was scripted to include multiple complications, equipment failures, changing weather conditions, and enemy forces that were stronger than initially briefed. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Maya's primary weapon system failed 20 minutes into the mission. Her radio communications were jammed by enemy electronic warfare. A sudden storm front moved in, reducing visibility to near zero. The ground team was pinned down by enemy fire and taking casualties. Most pilots would have called for backup, requested a mission abort, or at least asked for guidance from the command center. Maya did none of those things. She switched to her backup weapons, used rain masking to avoid enemy radar, and found a way to communicate with the ground team using light signals and aircraft movements. When her primary missiles failed, she used her cannon. When her cannon ran low on ammunition, she used her aircraft itself as a psychological weapon, making low passes over enemy positions to break up their formations. The mission was scheduled to last 4 hours. Maya completed the primary objective in 2 hours and 20 minutes, with 0 friendly casualties and complete destruction of the enemy force. When she landed, Master Sergeant Williams was waiting on the tarmac with a stopwatch and a clipboard full of notes. "Rodriguez," he said, "I've been running these exercises for 15 years. I've never seen anything like what you just did up there." "Thank you, sir," Maya replied, still in her flight suit, still carrying her helmet. "That wasn't a compliment," Williams said. "That was a statement of fact. You just rewrote the book on how these missions are supposed to be flown." Word of Maya's performance spread quickly through the military aviation community. Senior officers started showing up to watch her training flights. Defense contractors wanted to study her techniques. Aviation magazines wrote articles about the mystery pilot who was breaking records at the classified training facility. But Maya didn't pay attention to any of that. She was focused on the work, on getting better, on proving that she belonged not because of any diversity program, but because she was simply the best at what she did. She set new records in every category they measured: fastest completion times, highest accuracy scores, most complex missions successfully completed. By the time she graduated from the program, she held 17 different records, more than any other pilot in the facility's history. The graduation ceremony was a small affair, held in a windowless conference room with only the essential personnel present. Maya's mother had flown in from Los Angeles, wearing her best dress and carrying a small American flag. When Maya's name was called and she walked across the stage to receive her wings, there was something in the air, a sense that everyone present was witnessing something special. Captain Rodriguez was assigned to the 127th Special Operations Squadron, based out of Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. It was a unit that specialized in the missions nobody else wanted: deep penetration strikes behind enemy lines, high-risk rescue operations, and what the military euphemistically called special activities. The squadron's motto was, "When others won't, we will," and they lived up to it. Maya's first deployment was to Afghanistan, where she flew reconnaissance missions over the most dangerous parts of the country. The Taliban had surface-to-air missiles, trained operators, and a network of spotters who could track aircraft movements across hundreds of miles of territory. Flying over that landscape was like playing a deadly game of chess, where one wrong move could mean death. But Maya approached it with the same methodical precision she'd brought to everything else. She studied the terrain, the weather patterns, the enemy's tactics and capabilities. She flew routes that other pilots considered impossible, using valleys and ridgelines to mask her approach, timing her flights to take advantage of atmospheric conditions that would confuse enemy radar. On her 13th mission over the Hindu Kush Mountains, Maya encountered something that would change the trajectory of her entire career. Intelligence had reported a downed helicopter crew trapped in a valley controlled by enemy forces. The location was considered so dangerous that 2 previous rescue attempts had been called off due to the risk level. The terrain was a nightmare narrow. Valleys with walls that rose almost vertically for thousands of feet, creating wind shears that could tear an aircraft apart. The mission briefing had been sobering. Colonel Hassan, the squadron commander, laid out the facts with military precision. The crew has been down for 18 hours. Enemy forces are converging on their position. Weather window closes in 4 hours due to an incoming storm system. Satellite imagery shows at least 50 hostiles in the immediate area, with heavy weapons and anti-aircraft capabilities. Every pilot in the briefing room understood what he wasn't saying directly. This was a suicide mission. The mathematical probability of success was so low that sending aircraft into that environment would likely result in more casualties than it would prevent. The crew on the ground consisted of 4 people. A rescue attempt could easily cost 8 or more lives. If it went wrong, Maya had sat in the back of the briefing room, studying the topographical maps and satellite images with the intensity of someone solving a complex equation. While other pilots were calculating the risks, she was calculating possibilities. The valley had wind patterns that changed predictably based on temperature differentials. The enemy positions were clustered in areas that offered good fields of fire but poor mobility. Most importantly, there was a narrow approach route that would be invisible to ground-based radar if flown at exactly the right altitude and speed. When Colonel Hassan asked for volunteers, the room fell silent. These were experienced combat pilots, people who had flown hundreds of dangerous missions, but they understood mathematics. The odds weren't just bad, they were astronomical. Maya raised her hand. "Rodriguez," Hassan said, "did you hear the briefing?" "Yes, sir. I can get them out." The risk assessment assumes conventional approach patterns and standard tactical doctrine. Maya interrupted, something that would have been career suicide from any other lieutenant. "But there's another way." She walked to the front of the room and began sketching on the whiteboard. Her plan involved flying at an altitude so low that she would literally be beneath the radar horizon, using the valley walls as cover, and timing her approach to coincide with a thermal inversion that would create a natural blind spot in the enemy's detection capabilities. The other pilots stared at her diagram like she was proposing to fly through a solid mountain. "Rodriguez," said Major Thompson, the squadron's most experienced pilot, "that approach path, it's physically impossible. The wind shear alone would tear your aircraft apart." Maya turned to face the room full of seasoned combat veterans. "Sir, with respect, I've flown this exact profile in the Colorado training facility. Different terrain, same physics. It can be done." "The training facility is a controlled environment," Hassan pointed out. "This is combat." "Yes, sir. Which is why I've spent the last 6 months studying the atmospheric conditions over this exact region. I know how the wind patterns work, how the thermals develop, how the enemy positions their detection equipment. This isn't a gamble, it's applied physics." The room was quiet for a long moment. Finally, Hassan spoke. "Rodriguez, if you're wrong about this, you die. If you're wrong and survive, 4 more people die because we don't get a second chance." Maya's voice was steady when she replied, "Sir, if I'm right, 8 people go home to their families tonight instead of 4 people dying in that valley." 2 hours later, Maya was in the cockpit of a modified Black Hawk helicopter, flying through mountain terrain that looked like the surface of an alien planet. The aircraft had been stripped of everything non-essential to reduce weight and improve maneuverability. She was flying alone, no co-pilot, no crew chief, no gunner. Just her, the machine, and a flight plan that existed nowhere in any military manual. The approach to the valley required her to maintain an altitude of exactly 47 feet above the ground while flying at 130 knots through a passage that was barely wider than her rotor diameter. The margin for error was measured in inches. A gust of wind at the wrong moment, a momentary lapse in concentration, or a miscalculation of the terrain would result in immediate death. Maya flew that approach like she was conducting a symphony. Every control input was precise, every adjustment calculated to account for the constantly changing conditions. She used the thermal currents rising from the valley floor to provide additional lift, timed her turns to coincide with lulls in the wind patterns, and maintained radio silence to avoid detection. When she reached the crash site, the situation was worse than the intelligence reports had indicated. The helicopter crew was pinned down behind the wreckage of their aircraft, taking sporadic fire from enemy positions on 3 sides. One of the crew members was unconscious, another was badly wounded, and all of them were running low on ammunition. Maya had perhaps 90 seconds on the ground before enemy forces would adjust their fire and turn her helicopter into scrap metal. She landed in a space that was barely large enough for her aircraft, with rotor blades clearing rocks and debris by margins that would have terrified other pilots. The crew chief, Sergeant Williams, was the first to reach her aircraft. "Ma'am," he shouted over the rotor noise, "how the hell did you get in here?" "Very carefully," Maya replied. "Can you move the wounded?" "Peterson's unconscious, Rodriguez has a leg wound, and Chun's been hit in the shoulder." Maya made rapid calculations. 4 people, plus equipment, plus the weight of medical gear. Her helicopter was already operating at the edge of its performance envelope due to the altitude and temperature. Adding that much weight would put her over the maximum allowable gross weight for safe flight. Strip everything non-essential. She ordered weapons, extra gear, anything that isn't directly related to keeping people alive. "Ma'am, if we dump our weapons and run into enemy contact." "Sergeant, if we don't dump weight, we crash into the side of a mountain and it doesn't matter what weapons we have." The evacuation took exactly 87 seconds. Maya had calculated that they could sustain ground fire for approximately 90 seconds before the enemy could reposition their weapons to target her aircraft effectively. She lifted off with 3 seconds to spare, carrying a load that exceeded her aircraft specifications by 400 pounds. The flight out of the valley was even more dangerous than the flight in. The additional weight meant she couldn't climb as rapidly, couldn't maneuver as aggressively, and couldn't maintain the precise altitude control that had gotten her past the enemy detection systems. She had to find a new route out, one that would keep her below the radar horizon, while carrying enough altitude to clear the mountain ridges. Maya solved the problem by using a technique that didn't exist in any flight manual. She flew in a continuous spiral climb, using the rising thermal currents to gain altitude while maintaining forward speed. It was a maneuver that required perfect timing and absolute precision, because a mistake would send them straight into the granite walls of the valley. Maya worked with the technical review team to develop new configuration procedures, updated technical manuals, and improved quality control processes. The work was tedious and technical, but it was also profoundly satisfying. Every procedure they refined, every checklist they improved, every training requirement they established would prevent future accidents and save pilots' lives. The final report of the F-16 avionics review was classified, but its impact was felt throughout military aviation. New standards were established for avionics configuration management, maintenance personnel received additional training, and quality control procedures were strengthened across all aircraft types. Maya's vindication in the F-16 investigation established her as the preeminent aviation safety expert in military circles, but it also made her a target for those who resented her influence. Word spread through the defense contractor community that Rodriguez Aviation Consulting had cost several major corporations millions of dollars in retrofits and redesigned procedures. Some contractors began lobbying against Maya's continued involvement. In military aviation safety, the pressure campaign against Maya was subtle but persistent. Defense industry representatives raised questions about the appropriateness of giving so much authority to a single contractor. They suggested that Maya's investigations were unnecessarily disruptive to established procedures and that her recommendations were often more extensive than necessary to address identified problems. The criticism reached Maya through unofficial channels, comments made at industry conferences, concerns raised in private meetings with Air Force officials, and suggestions that alternative contractors might provide more balanced perspectives on safety issues. Maya understood that her success had made her powerful enemies in an industry that valued stability and predictable relationships over disruptive safety improvements. The situation came to a head when Maya was assigned to investigate problems with the new KC-46 tanker aircraft. The Air Force had invested billions of dollars in the program, and the aircraft were essential to global military operations. But pilots were reporting problems with the aircraft's fuel transfer systems that made aerial refueling dangerous. Under certain conditions, Maya's investigation revealed that the fuel transfer problems were caused by design flaws in the aircraft's control software that hadn't been detected during the testing phase. The software worked perfectly under the controlled conditions used for certification flights, but it failed when aircraft encountered the turbulence and electromagnetic interference common in operational environments. The implications of Maya's findings were staggering. The KC-46 fleet represented one of the largest military aircraft programs in history, and Maya's recommendations would require extensive modifications to every aircraft in the fleet. The cost would be measured in hundreds of millions of dollars, and the timeline would delay deployment of the aircraft for months or possibly years. Maya submitted her report to General Morrison, who had become the Air Force's primary advocate for aviation safety reform. Morrison reviewed the findings with a team of technical experts and concluded that Maya's analysis was accurate and her recommendations were necessary to ensure safe operations. But when Morrison attempted to implement Maya's recommendations, he encountered resistance from the highest levels of the Air Force hierarchy. The KC-46 program was too important, too expensive, and too visible to be delayed by safety concerns that some officials characterized as theoretical rather than immediate. Maya found herself summoned to a meeting at the Pentagon with Air Force Chief of Staff General Roberts and several senior officials from the defense contractor community. The meeting was officially described as a technical review, but Maya understood that it was actually a tribunal where her findings would be challenged and possibly dismissed. Ms. Rodriguez, General Roberts began, "Your investigation of the KC-46 program has raised concerns about the cost and timeline implications of your recommendations. We need to understand whether the problems you've identified represent immediate safety risks or theoretical issues that can be addressed through operational procedures." Maya had prepared extensively for this meeting, knowing that her response would determine not only the fate of the KC-46 program, but also her own future in military aviation safety. "General, the fuel transfer system failures I've documented occur predictably under specific operational conditions. These aren't theoretical problems. They're design flaws that will cause accidents if not corrected. Ms. Rodriguez, the contractor has provided extensive testing data showing that the fuel transfer systems operate within acceptable parameters under all certified conditions." "General, the certified conditions don't include the electromagnetic warfare environments and severe turbulence conditions that our aircraft routinely encounter in operational deployments. The testing was inadequate for the intended operational environment." The defense contractor representative, a senior executive named Johnson, interjected, "Ms. Rodriguez, your recommendations would require fundamental changes to systems that have been certified by the Federal Aviation Administration and approved by Air Force technical authorities. Are you suggesting that all of these qualified experts were wrong? Maya looked directly at Johnson, recognizing him as one of the executives whose company had profited from the maintenance fraud she had exposed years earlier. I'm suggesting that certification testing conducted under controlled conditions doesn't guarantee safe performance under operational conditions. The history of military aviation is filled with examples of systems that worked perfectly during testing, but failed catastrophically in combat. The meeting continued for over 3 hours, with Maya defending her findings against challenges from military officials and contractor representatives who questioned her methodology, her conclusions, and her authority to make recommendations. That would have such significant cost implications. Finally, General Roberts called for a break and asked Maya to remain behind for a private conversation. When the room had cleared, Roberts looked at Maya with an expression that mixed frustration with grudging respect. Ms. Rodriguez, you've made a lot of enemies in this town. There are people who would like nothing better than to see you discredited and removed from military aviation safety work. Maya met his gaze steadily. General, I've never been concerned about making enemies when lives are at stake. My job is to identify safety problems and recommend solutions, not to worry about the political consequences. Your job is whatever I say it is, Roberts replied sharply. You're a contractor, not a military officer, and you serve at the pleasure of this command. General, my contract specifies that I have independence to investigate safety issues and make recommendations based on technical evidence. If that independence is compromised, then my effectiveness is compromised. Roberts was quiet for a long moment, considering Maya's words. Ms. Rodriguez, the KC-46 program is essential to Air Force operations. Delaying the program or requiring extensive modifications would have implications that extend far beyond aviation safety. General, what good is an essential program if the aircraft aren't safe to operate? How does it serve Air Force operations to deploy aircraft that will cause accidents and kill pilots? Roberts sighed deeply. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm going to approve a limited implementation of your recommendations, enough to address the most critical safety issues without completely disrupting the program timeline. But I want you to understand something. This is the last time I'm going to support recommendations that have this kind of cost and schedule impact. Maya understood the message clearly. She was being told that her future recommendations would be evaluated not just on their technical merit, but on their political and financial acceptability. It was the same bureaucratic pressure that had frustrated her military career, now applied to her contractor position. But Maya also understood something that General Roberts might not have fully appreciated. Investigation of the KC-46 had been observed by hundreds of pilots, maintenance personnel, and safety officers throughout the Air Force. Her findings had been documented, her methodology had been validated, and her reputation for identifying critical safety issues had been reinforced. Over the following months, as the limited modifications to the KC-46 fleet were implemented, Maya's predictions proved accurate. The aircraft performed significantly better under operational conditions, and pilots reported increased confidence in the fuel transfer systems. Most importantly, no accidents occurred that could be attributed to the design flaws Maya had identified. The official investigation concluded that Chen had suffered spatial disorientation during the low-level flight, leading to controlled flight into terrain. It was a textbook accident report pilot error caused by challenging weather conditions and difficult terrain. The case was closed within 6 weeks, and Chen's death was recorded as another tragic reminder of the inherent dangers of military aviation. Maya was reviewing the accident report as part of her routine safety oversight when something caught her attention. Chen's aircraft had been equipped with the same avionics systems that Maya had investigated at the 127th Special Operations Squadron 2 years earlier. The systems had been modified according to Maya's recommendations, but the accident report made no mention of avionics performance or electronic system status. Maya requested the complete investigation file, including maintenance records, flight data recorder information, and pilot training documentation. What she found disturbed her. The investigation had been cursory and incomplete, focusing only on the most obvious potential causes, while ignoring several technical anomalies that should have been explored further. The flight data recorder showed that Chun's aircraft had experienced multiple system warnings in the minutes before the crash, but these warnings had been dismissed by investigators as normal alerts that any experienced pilot would have handled routinely. Maya's analysis revealed a different story. The warnings indicated a cascading failure of electronic systems that would have left Chun flying essentially blind in challenging weather conditions. Maya began conducting her own investigation, using her contractor status to access information and personnel that had been unavailable to the original investigation team. She interviewed mechanics who had worked on Chun's aircraft, reviewed parts replacement records, and analyzed the electronic system configurations that had been installed during recent maintenance actions. The evidence pointed to a disturbing conclusion. Chun's aircraft had been configured with software settings that were incompatible with the specific avionics hardware installed in her F-16. The mismatch wouldn't cause problems under normal flight conditions, but it would create dangerous system failures when the aircraft was operated at low altitude in poor weather. Maya's investigation revealed that the incompatible configuration wasn't unique to Chun's aircraft. A systematic review of maintenance records showed that dozens of F-16s across multiple bases had been configured with the same problematic software settings. The potential for additional accidents was enormous. Maya submitted her findings to Colonel Morrison and the Air Force Safety Center, expecting immediate action to identify and correct the configuration problems in other aircraft. Instead, she encountered the same bureaucratic resistance that had frustrated her military career years earlier. The response came in the form of a meeting with Brigadier General Williams, the Director of Air Force Flight Safety. Williams was a career officer who had earned his position through political acumen rather than technical expertise, and he was clearly uncomfortable with Maya's role as an independent contractor with direct access to senior commanders. Ms. Rodriguez, Williams began, your investigation into the Chun accident has raised some concerns at higher levels of command. The official investigation was conducted by qualified personnel using established procedures, and it reached conclusions that are supported by the available evidence. Maya had prepared for this conversation. General, the official investigation failed to address critical technical issues that directly contributed to the accident. Lieutenant Colonel Chun's death was preventable if proper analysis had been conducted. On the avionics configuration, Ms. Rodriguez, you're overstepping your authority as a contractor. Your role is to provide technical consultation, not to second-guess official investigations or challenge the findings of qualified officers. General, my contract specifically authorizes me to investigate safety issues regardless of their political implications. The avionics configuration problem affects dozens of aircraft and represents an immediate threat to pilot safety. Williams leaned back in his chair, his expression revealing his frustration with Maya's persistence. Ms. Rodriguez, the avionics systems in question have been certified by the manufacturer and approved by Air Force technical authorities. There is no evidence of systemic problems. There is evidence, General. I've documented configuration mismatches in 43 aircraft across 7 different bases. The evidence is conclusive. Evidence that contradicts the findings of official investigations and challenges the competence of the officers who conducted those investigations. Maya realized that she was facing the same institutional resistance that had defined her military career. The bureaucracy was more concerned with protecting reputations and avoiding embarrassment than with addressing legitimate safety issues. she made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. Instead of continuing to work within the official channels that had already demonstrated their unwillingness to address the problem, Maya decided to take her evidence directly to the pilots who were flying the affected aircraft. Maya began reaching out to squadron commanders and safety officers at bases where she had identified aircraft with the problematic configurations. Her approach was methodical and professional. She presented the technical evidence, explained the potential consequences, and recommended immediate inspections to verify the configurations of their aircraft. The response was immediate and dramatic. Squadron commanders who understood the implications of Maya's findings began grounding aircraft pending complete avionics inspections. Pilots who had experienced unexplained system warnings during recent flights realized that they had been closer to disaster than they had understood. Within 2 weeks, over 60 F-16s had been grounded at bases across the country as commanders acted on Maya's warnings. The grounding of so many aircraft created operational problems for the affected units, but it also created political problems for the senior officers who had dismissed Maya's initial warnings. The Air Force leadership found itself in an untenable position. They could either acknowledge that Maya's investigation had identified legitimate safety issues that had been missed by official investigators, or they could attempt to discredit her findings and force the grounded aircraft back into service. General Williams chose a third option. He attempted to remove Maya from her contractor position by claiming that she had exceeded her authority and undermined military discipline. A formal complaint was filed alleging that Maya had interfered with military operations and had acted outside the scope of her contract. The complaint triggered a review of Maya's contractor status that was conducted by the Air Force General Counsel's office. Maya was informed that her access to military installations and aircraft would be suspended pending the outcome of the review. But Maya's network of contacts within the pilot community had grown beyond what anyone realized. Squadron commanders who had grounded aircraft based on her warnings were now conducting their own investigations, documenting the same configuration problems that Maya had identified. The breakthrough came when maintenance crews at Luke Air Force Base discovered that an F-16 scheduled for a training flight had avionics settings that exactly matched the configuration found in Chun's aircraft. The aircraft was immediately grounded, and a detailed inspection revealed multiple system incompatibilities that would have caused catastrophic failures under operational conditions. Colonel James Patterson, the wing commander at Luke, was a former test pilot who understood the technical implications of the avionics problems. He submitted a formal report to Air Force headquarters detailing the configuration issues and recommending a comprehensive review of all F-16 avionics installations. Patterson's report carried weight that Maya's contractor findings had lacked. It came from a senior commander with operational responsibility for the affected aircraft, and it was supported by documentation from military maintenance personnel rather than an outside contractor. The Air Force response was swift and comprehensive. A team of technical experts was assembled to conduct a fleet-wide review of 16 avionics configurations. The review confirmed Maya's findings. Dozens of aircraft had been configured with incompatible software settings that created serious safety hazards. The scope of the problem extended beyond individual aircraft to the systemic issues that had allowed the configuration errors to occur. The Air Force had implemented new avionics systems without adequately training maintenance personnel on the proper configuration procedures. Technical manuals were incomplete, inspection checklists were inadequate, and quality control procedures had failed to detect the errors. Maya's suspension was quietly lifted, and she was asked to assist with the fleet-wide review. Her role was officially described as technical consultation, but everyone involved understood that she had been vindicated. The investigation revealed that the configuration problems had contributed to at least 4 additional accidents over the previous 2 years. all of which had been attributed to pilot error or mechanical failure. The true cost of the systemic maintenance failures was higher than anyone had realized. 43 minutes after taking off, Maya's helicopter appeared on the radar screens at the forward operating base, like a ghost materializing out of nowhere. The air traffic controller, who had been monitoring the radio frequencies for any sign of the rescue mission, couldn't believe what he was seeing. Unknown aircraft, identify yourself and state your intentions. This is Thunder 6 with 4 souls on board, requesting immediate medical evacuation clearance. Thunder 6, confirm you completed the rescue mission? Affirmative. All personnel accounted for. When Maya landed at the base, there was a crowd waiting. Word had spread that someone had actually pulled off the impossible mission, and everyone wanted to see the pilot who had flown into a valley that had been written off as inaccessible. Colonel Hassan was standing at the edge of the landing zone when Maya shut down her engines. As she climbed out of the cockpit, he approached with an expression that mixed amazement with something approaching disbelief. "Rodriguez," he said, "what you just did, according to every manual, every regulation, every piece of conventional wisdom we have, it was impossible." Maya pulled off her helmet and looked at the 4 crew members being loaded onto medical stretchers. All of them were alive, all of them would recover, all of them would go home to their families. "Sir," she replied, "impossible is just another mission parameter." The rescue mission made Maya famous throughout the military aviation community. But it also made her something else, a target for people who couldn't accept that their assumptions about her had been wrong. Some senior officers began to question whether her success was really due to skill or just luck. Others suggested that the mission had been unnecessarily risky, that she had endangered more lives than she had saved. The criticism reached a crescendo during a briefing at the Pentagon, where Maya was called to explain her tactics to a room full of generals and defense officials. The session was supposed to be a debriefing, but it quickly became an interrogation. "Captain Rodriguez," said General Morrison, a man whose own combat experience dated back to Vietnam, "your flight profile during the rescue mission deviated significantly from established protocols. How do you justify exposing a military aircraft and crew to unnecessary risk?" Maya had prepared for this question. She stood at attention and replied, "Sir, the established protocols would have resulted in mission failure and the loss of 4 lives. The risk was calculated and deemed acceptable given the potential outcome." "Calculated by whom?" Morrison pressed. "You made that decision unilaterally, without consulting higher command authority." "Yes, sir." The tactical situation required immediate action. There was no time for extended consultation. "Captain, you seem to believe that your judgment supersedes military chain of command." Maya paused for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Sir, I believe that my training and experience qualified me to make tactical decisions in a combat environment." The mission was successful, all personnel were recovered, and no additional casualties were incurred. The room was silent for several seconds. Finally, General Morrison spoke again. "Captain Rodriguez, your actions may have been successful, but they demonstrated a pattern of insubordination that concerns this command. You will be transferred to a non-combat assignment, pending a full review of your service record." 3 weeks later, Maya found herself assigned to a desk job at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado, processing logistics reports and reviewing maintenance schedules. It was the kind of assignment that was designed to break pilots, to convince them that they didn't belong in the cockpit. But Maya approached her new assignment with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. She studied supply chain management, learned advanced logistics planning, and became an expert in aircraft maintenance protocols. When other officers complained about the bureaucracy, Maya was finding ways to streamline processes and improve efficiency. 6 months into her desk assignment, Maya made a discovery that would change everything. While reviewing maintenance records for the squadron's aircraft, she noticed patterns that shouldn't have existed: parts being replaced too frequently, maintenance issues that kept recurring, aircraft being grounded for problems that had supposedly been fixed. Maya began digging deeper, using her new expertise in logistics and supply chain management to trace the problems to their source. What she found was a systematic pattern of corner-cutting and fraud that was putting pilots' lives at risk. The maintenance fraud Maya uncovered was more extensive than anyone could have imagined. Defense contractors were supplying substandard parts marked as military-grade components. Mechanics were signing off on inspections that were never performed, and squadron commanders were pressured to keep aircraft operational regardless of their actual condition. The paper trail led through a network of suppliers, inspection facilities, and administrative offices that stretched across 3 states and involved millions of dollars in fraudulent contracts. Maya spent her evenings in the empty office building, cross-referencing part numbers with accident reports, matching serial numbers with maintenance logs, and building a database that revealed the true scope of the corruption. What she discovered made her blood run cold. At least 12 aircraft accidents over the past 2 years could be directly attributed to the fraudulent parts and skipped maintenance procedures. The evidence was overwhelming, but Maya faced a problem that was all too familiar. Nobody wanted to hear what she had to say. When she tried to present her findings to her immediate supervisor, Major Davidson, he dismissed her concerns as the obsessions of a pilot who couldn't accept being grounded. "Rodriguez," Davidson said, barely looking up from his computer screen, "you're supposed to be processing logistics reports, not conducting unauthorized investigations. Submit your findings through proper channels and let the appropriate authorities handle it." Maya knew that submitting her findings through proper channels would result in the evidence disappearing into the bureaucratic maze that protected the very people who were profiting from the fraud. She had learned enough about military politics to understand that her investigation threatened too many careers, too many contracts, and too much money for it to be allowed to proceed through normal channels. But Maya had also learned something else during her months of desk duty: the military bureaucracy that seemed so impenetrable from the outside could be navigated by someone who understood its systems and procedures. She began making copies of documents, creating backup files, and establishing a paper trail that would be difficult to eliminate. The breakthrough came when Maya discovered that one of the aircraft involved in a recent training accident had been equipped with counterfeit engine parts that had failed at a critical moment. The pilot, Lieutenant Sarah Chun, had been forced to make an emergency landing that resulted in career-ending injuries. The official accident report blamed pilot error, but Maya's investigation revealed that the engine failure was due to a fraudulent turbine blade that had been manufactured in a facility that had never been properly certified. Maya made a decision that would define the next phase of her career. Instead of continuing to work within the system that had already demonstrated its unwillingness to address the problem, she decided to take her evidence directly to the people who needed to know about it: the pilots who were flying the compromised aircraft. She began reaching out to pilots and squadrons across the country, using unofficial channels and personal contacts to share her findings. The response was immediate and explosive. Pilots who had experienced unexplained equipment failures suddenly understood what had really happened. Maintenance crews who had been pressured to sign off unquestionable repairs realized they weren't alone in their concerns. Within 2 weeks, Maya had assembled a network of pilots, mechanics, and support personnel who were documenting similar problems in their own units. The evidence was no longer coming from one disgruntled pilot in Colorado. It was coming from dozens of sources across multiple bases, all pointing to the same systematic corruption. The military hierarchy's response was swift and predictable. Maya was called into a meeting with Colonel Harrison, the base commander, and informed that she was being investigated for unauthorized disclosure of classified information, conducting activities outside her scope of duty. and potentially violating federal regulations regarding defense contractors. Ma'am, we've got a developing situation here. 2 F-35s went down during a combat mission 6 hours ago. Both aircraft experienced simultaneous engine failures over hostile territory. We've recovered one pilot, but Captain Sarah Chun is still missing behind enemy lines. Maya felt her blood run cold. Chun was one of the pilots she had worked with during the F-35 engine investigation, a young officer who had implemented Maya's safety protocols in her own squadron. More troubling was the report of simultaneous engine failures, a pattern that shouldn't occur unless there was a systematic problem that had gone undetected. Colonel, what engines were installed in those aircraft? Ma'am, both aircraft had the new Mark 7 engines that were supposed to replace the problematic units we identified in your investigation. These engines have been in service for 8 months with no reported issues. Maya was already pulling up her database of engine performance data as Martinez spoke. The Mark 7 engines had been rushed into production to replace the defective units that Maya's investigation had identified, but the accelerated development timeline had concerned her from the beginning. Colonel, I need you to ground all aircraft with Mark 7 engines until we can determine what caused these failures. Don't wait for authorization from the program office. This is a direct safety order. Ma'am, grounding those engines would mean taking half our combat aircraft offline during active operations. I need to clear this with Colonel, Maya interrupted, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of being right when others had been wrong. Ground those aircraft. Now. We'll deal with the political consequences later. Maya spent the next 18 hours coordinating a comprehensive investigation, while simultaneously monitoring the search and rescue operation for Captain Chun. The investigation revealed that the Mark 7 engines contained a design flaw that caused catastrophic failure when operated at high altitude in extreme temperature conditions, exactly the operating environment encountered during combat operations in Afghanistan. The search for Captain Chun lasted 4 days and involved resources from multiple allied nations. She was finally located by Special Operations Forces, alive but injured, hiding in a cave system 30 miles behind enemy lines. Her rescue became international news, but Maya understood that the real story was the systematic failure that had put Chun and her wingmen in danger in the first place. Maya's investigation of the Mark 7 engine failures revealed that the accelerated development process had skipped critical testing phases that would have identified the design flaw before the engines entered service. The pressure to replace the problematic engines quickly had led to corners being cut in exactly the ways that Maya had warned against. The revelation that another systematic engine problem had been allowed to reach operational aircraft despite Maya's oversight led to congressional hearings and intense media scrutiny. Maya found herself testifying before the Senate Armed Services Committee about the systemic issues that continued to plague military aviation safety. Senator Williams, the committee chairman, addressed Maya directly during the hearing. Ms. Rodriguez, you've now identified systematic problems in 2 different F-35 engine designs. How is it possible that these issues continue to occur despite the safety systems you've established? Maya's response was measured but pointed. Senator, safety systems only work when they're properly implemented and adequately funded. The pressure to maintain operational capability and reduce costs continues to override safety considerations in ways that put pilots at risk. What would you recommend to prevent similar problems in the future? Senator, we need to establish mandatory testing requirements that cannot be waived for schedule or cost reasons. We need independent oversight of all safety-critical components. And we need to change the culture that treats safety as an optional feature rather than a fundamental requirement. The hearings resulted in comprehensive legislation that strengthened safety oversight requirements and established mandatory testing protocols that could not be bypassed. Maya's recommendations became the foundation for new regulations that transformed how military aircraft were developed, tested, and maintained. But Maya's most important achievement from the Mark 7 investigation was Personal Captain Chun's successful rescue proved that the safety protocols Maya had established could save lives even when equipment failed. Chun's survival training, emergency procedures, and rescue coordination had all been enhanced based on lessons learned from Maya's previous investigations. The final chapter of Maya's career began with an invitation that surprised everyone, including Maya herself. The Secretary of Defense, Patricia Morrison, requested a private meeting to discuss what she described as the future of military aviation safety and your role in shaping it. Morrison's office in the Pentagon was a testament to decades of military service, with photographs of aircraft carriers, fighter jets, and troops in combat zones covering the walls. But when Maya arrived for the meeting, Morrison's attention was focused on a thick folder containing safety statistics that told a remarkable story. "Ms. Rodriguez," Morrison began, "since you established the Independent Aviation Safety Analysis Program, military aviation accidents have decreased by 63%. That represents approximately 400 lives saved and over $3 billion in prevented aircraft losses. Your work has fundamentally changed how we approach aviation safety." Maya listened quietly as Morrison outlined the impact of the safety program she had developed. The statistics were impressive, but Maya understood that behind each number was a pilot who had returned home safely, a family that hadn't received a devastating phone call, and a squadron that hadn't lost a member to preventable accidents. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm offering you the position of Undersecretary of Defense for Aviation Safety. It's a newly created position that would give you authority over safety operations across all military service, says Air Force, Navy, Marines, and Army aviation units." The offer represented the culmination of everything Maya had worked toward, but it also represented a fundamental change in how she would approach safety work. As Undersecretary, she would have unprecedented authority and resources, but she would also be part of the political structure that she had spent years challenging. Maya spent a week considering Morrison's offer, consulting with colleagues, mentors, and the pilots who had supported her work over the years. The decision came down to a simple question: where could she do the most good for the most people? She accepted the position with one condition: that she would retain the independence to investigate safety issues without political interference, even when those investigations might be embarrassing or costly for the Department of Defense. Morrison agreed without hesitation. Maya's confirmation hearing before the Senate was a formality. Her record of identifying and solving safety problems had earned her bipartisan support, and her nomination was approved unanimously. When she was sworn in as Undersecretary, Maya became the highest-ranking Hispanic woman in the Department of Defense and the first person to hold a senior defense position based primarily on technical expertise rather than political connections. Her first initiative as Undersecretary was the establishment of the Joint Aviation Safety Command, a unified organization that coordinated safety efforts across all military services. The command included representatives from every branch of the military, civilian agencies, and international partners, creating a comprehensive approach to aviation safety that had never existed before. Maya's leadership style as Undersecretary reflected everything she had learned during her years as an investigator and safety advocate. She maintained an open-door policy that allowed any military member, regardless of rank or service, to report safety concerns directly to her office. She established rapid response teams that could investigate emerging safety issues within hours, rather than weeks. Most importantly, Maya created a culture within the Department of Defense that treated safety as a core military capability rather than an administrative burden. She convinced senior leaders that safe operations were more effective operations, and that investing in safety actually enhanced military readiness rather than detracting from it. The transformation that Maya led extended beyond military aviation to influence how all branches of the military approached risk management. Her methodologies were adopted by ground forces, naval operations, and special operations units, creating a comprehensive safety culture that touched every aspect of military operations. Maya's influence reached its peak during the international crisis that tested every system she had helped establish. When tensions escalated in the South China Sea and military operations increased dramatically, Maya's safety protocols ensured that the expanded flight operations proceeded without a single major accident, proving that safety and operational effectiveness were not competing priorities, but complementary capabilities. As Maya approached retirement after 5 years as undersecretary, she reflected on the journey that had taken her from being dismissed as a diversity pick to becoming one of the most influential figures in military aviation. The transformation hadn't been easy and it hadn't been quick, but it had been absolutely necessary. Maya found herself at the center of a political storm that extended far beyond aviation safety. She was simultaneously praised as a whistleblower who had prevented potential disasters and criticized as a contractor who had disrupted essential military operations. Congressional committees wanted her testimony, media outlets wanted her interviews, and defense contractors wanted her silenced. But Maya's focus remained on the technical work that had revealed the engine problems in the first place. She worked with Air Force engineers and Consolidated Aerospace technicians to develop new inspection procedures that could detect the early stages of the failure pattern she had identified. The work was tedious and detailed, but it was also essential for preventing similar problems in the future. The comprehensive investigation that followed Maya's discoveries revealed that the engine problems were caused by a combination of manufacturing defects and inadequate quality control procedures. Changes to the manufacturing process during the problematic 6-month period had introduced subtle variations that weren't detected by existing inspection procedures, but led to accelerated component wear under operational conditions. Maya's analysis had not only identified the immediate safety problems, but had also revealed fundamental weaknesses in the quality control and safety oversight systems that were supposed to prevent such problems from occurring. Her investigation had exposed the gap between theoretical safety procedures and real-world effectiveness that had characterized military aviation safety for decades. 3 months after the F-35 groundings, Maya received an unexpected call from General Roberts, the Air Force Chief of Staff, who had once threatened to terminate her contract. His voice carried a tone she had never heard before, something that sounded almost like humility. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm calling to inform you that the Air Force is establishing a new position, Director of Independent Aviation Safety Analysis. The position reports directly to the Chief of Staff and has unprecedented authority to investigate safety issues across all Air Force operations. We'd like you to consider accepting this appointment." Maya was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what Roberts was proposing. The position he was describing would give her official authority to do the work she had been doing as a contractor, but with institutional backing and resources that would make her investigations far more effective. "General, what changed?" Maya asked. 3 months ago, you were telling me that my recommendations were too disruptive and politically unacceptable." Roberts sighed audibly. "Ms. Rodriguez, your F-35 investigation prevented what could have been multiple catastrophic accidents. Our analysis indicates that at least 12 of the engines you identified would have failed within the next 6 months of operations. You likely saved dozens of lives and prevented a program disaster that would have cost billions of dollars." The new position represented everything Maya had worked toward throughout her career: the authority to investigate safety problems without bureaucratic interference, the resources to conduct comprehensive analyses, and the institutional backing to implement necessary changes regardless of their political or financial implications. Maya accepted the appointment, understanding that it represented not just a personal achievement, but a fundamental shift in how the military approached aviation. Safety. For the first time in Air Force history, safety analysis would be conducted by someone whose career advancement depended on finding problems rather than hiding them. Her first official act as director was to establish the Aviation Safety Network, a formal version of the informal communication system she had built over years of contractor work. The network connected safety officers, pilots, and maintenance personnel across all Air Force installations, creating a systematic method for identifying and addressing emerging safety issues. The network's effectiveness was demonstrated within its first 6 months of operation, when maintenance personnel at 3 different bases reported similar problems with a new navigation system. The traditional bureaucratic process would have required months to correlate these reports and initiate an investigation. Maya's network identified the pattern within days and implemented preventive measures before any accidents occurred. Maya's transformation from dismissed diversity pick to the Air Force's premier safety authority became a symbol of how individual determination could overcome institutional resistance. Young pilots, particularly women and minorities, began to see her as proof that excellence could not be ignored indefinitely, regardless of the barriers placed in its path. But Maya understood that her real legacy wasn't her personal success. It was the systematic changes she had helped implement in how the military approached aviation safety. The culture that had once prioritized institutional reputation over pilot lives was slowly giving way to one that recognized safety as the foundation of effective military operations. Years later, when pilots gathered to discuss the legends of military aviation, they would tell the story of Maya Rodriguez, the pilot who had been called a diversity pick until she broke every record, who had been declared a troublemaker until she saved countless lives, and who had proven that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in the sky, but in conference rooms where courage means telling the truth regardless of the consequences. Maya's office at the Pentagon became a pilgrimage site for young officers who had heard the stories, but wanted to understand the reality behind the legend. They would arrive expecting to meet someone larger than life, only to find a woman in her early 40s who looked more like a college professor than a military hero. The walls of her office told the real story, detailed technical diagrams, accident analysis charts, and photographs of pilots whose lives had been saved by investigations that others had dismissed as unnecessary. On her desk sat a small model of an F-16, a gift from the pilots of the 127th Special Operations Squadron, with an inscription that read, "To the pilot who never stopped flying, she just changed aircraft." Maya's daily routine reflected her understanding that safety was built through attention to details that others might overlook. She arrived at the office before dawn, spending the first hours of each day reviewing overnight reports from bases around the world. A vibration anomaly in Japan, an electrical system glitch in Germany, a fuel system irregularity in Alaska. Each report was analyzed for patterns that might indicate emerging problems. The aviation safety network that Maya had established now included over 3,000 military personnel across 6 continents, all connected by a shared understanding that preventing accidents required constant vigilance and immediate communication. When a problem was identified anywhere in the network, solutions developed at one base could be implemented globally within hours rather than months. Maya's influence extended beyond the Air Force to other military services and civilian aviation. Authorities who recognized that her systematic approach to safety analysis could be applied to any aviation operation. She became a consultant to NASA, the Federal Aviation Administration, and international aviation safety organizations. sharing the methodologies that had transformed military aviation safety. But Maya's most important work remained focused on the individual pilots whose lives depended on the aircraft they flew every day. She never forgot that behind every technical analysis, every statistical correlation, and every safety recommendation were real people with families who deserved to return home safely from every mission. The transformation of military aviation safety that Maya had helped lead was measured not just in reduced accident rates, but in a fundamental change in how the military approached risk management. The culture that had once accepted accidents as inevitable costs of military operations had evolved into one that treated every accident as a failure of systematic safety processes that could and should be prevented. Maya understood that her legacy would ultimately be measured not by the recognition she received, but by the accidents that never happened, the pilots who never became statistics, and the families who never received devastating phone calls because someone had been willing to challenge conventional wisdom and fight for systematic change. As she looked toward retirement, Maya knew that the safety system she had helped establish would continue to evolve and improve long after she was gone. The young officers who now filled key safety positions throughout the military carried forward her understanding that technical excellence and moral courage were inseparable, and that the most important victories were often won not through dramatic heroism but through persistent attention to details that others preferred to ignore. The story of Maya Rodriguez would be told for generations as proof that individual determination could overcome institutional resistance, that technical competence could triumph over political convenience, and that sometimes the most important service to one's country involved the courage to speak truth to power when lives were at stake. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, 3 years into Maya's tenure as Director of Independent Aviation Safety Analysis. The voice on the secure line belonged to Colonel Martinez from Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan, and Maya could hear the tension in his words before he even explained the situation. Her farewell address to the Department of Defense was carried live on military television networks worldwide, reaching hundreds of thousands of service members who had been touched by the safety programs she had established. Maya's message was simple but powerful. Safety isn't about following rules, it's about making sure everyone comes home. 25 years after Maya first walked into that training facility as a dismissed diversity pick, she stood before a new class of aviation cadets at the Air Force Academy. The auditorium was packed with young faces, men and women of every background, united by their dreams of flight and service. "They told me I didn't belong," Maya began, her voice carrying across the silent room. "They said I was just filling a quota, that I'd never measure up to their standards. And you know what? They were right about one thing I didn't measure up to their standards. I exceeded them." The cadets erupted in applause, but Maya raised her hand for silence. "But this story isn't about proving doubters wrong. It's about something far more important. It's about refusing to accept that good enough is actually good enough when lives are at stake." Maya walked among the cadets, making eye contact with each young face. "Some of you will face the same doubts I faced. People will question whether you belong, whether you're qualified, whether you can handle the pressure. When that happens, remember this: your response isn't what you say, it's what you do." She paused at the front of the room, her gaze sweeping across the future of military aviation. Excellence isn't about being better than others. It's about being better than you were yesterday. It's about asking the hard questions when everyone else stays silent. It's about standing up for what's right when it would be easier to stay seated. Maya's final words resonated through the academy halls. "They called me a diversity pick until I broke every record in the unit, but those records don't define me. What defines me is every pilot who came home safely because someone refused to accept that accidents were inevitable. Your story matters too. Whether you're fighting to prove yourself in your career, challenging systems that need change, or simply trying to do the right thing when others won't, you're part of Maya's legacy. Subscribe to join our community of people who refuse to accept good enough when excellence is possible. Hit that notification bell, because every week we share stories of ordinary people who achieved extraordinary things by simply refusing to give up. What's your diversity pick moment? Share it in comments below. Your story might inspire our next video. Captain Rodriguez, Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. You seem to have forgotten that you're a junior officer in the United States Air Force, not an investigative journalist. Your job is to follow orders, not to create problems for people who outrank you. Maya sat at attention, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm. Sir, my job is to serve my country and protect the lives of my fellow service members. The evidence I've gathered indicates that substandard parts and fraudulent maintenance procedures are putting pilots at risk. The evidence you've gathered through unauthorized activities that exceeded your assigned duties. Harrison replied, Captain, you have a pattern of insubordination that goes back to your training days. This investigation is the final straw. Sir, with respect, the investigation has revealed information that could prevent future accidents and save lives. The investigation is over, Captain. You're being transferred to administrative duties at Randolph Air Force Base in Texas, effective immediately. Consider this a final warning. Any further unauthorized activities will result in court-martial proceedings. The transfer to Randolph was clearly intended to bury Maya in the military bureaucracy. Randolph Air Force Base was known as the showplace of the Air Force, a facility focused on training and administration rather than combat operations. It was where careers went to die slowly, buried under endless paperwork and meaningless assignments. Maya's network of contacts had grown beyond what anyone realized. Pilots, mechanics, and support personnel who had been following her investigation were now conducting their own research, documenting problems in their own units, and sharing information through unofficial channels. The story was too big to contain, and the evidence was too compelling to ignore. 3 months after Maya arrived at Randolph, a congressional investigation was announced into defense contractor fraud and military aircraft safety. The investigation had been triggered by a detailed report submitted by an anonymous group calling themselves the Safety Network, which included thousands of pages of documentation, maintenance records, and accident analyses. Maya was working late in her office when she received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was familiar Lieutenant Chun, the pilot who had been injured in the aircraft accident that Maya had investigated. Captain Rodriguez, Chun said, I wanted you to know that the congressional investigators have requested copies of all the documents you compiled about my accident. They're treating it as evidence of criminal fraud. How did they get access to those documents? Maya asked. Someone made sure they reached the right people. Someone who understood that the truth needed to come out, regardless of the consequences. Maya smiled slightly. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the official thing to do. Captain, there's something else you should know. The safety network that's been feeding information to Congress, it's grown to include over 300 military personnel from bases across the country. Word is spreading that you were the one who started this, who had the courage to speak up when nobody else would. The congressional investigation moved with surprising speed and efficiency. Within 6 months, criminal charges had been filed against 12 defense contractors, 37 civilian employees, and 14 military personnel. The fraud had cost taxpayers over $200 million and had directly contributed to at least 18 aircraft accidents. Maya was called to testify before Congress about her role in exposing the corruption. The hearing room was packed with reporters, military officials, and family members of pilots who had been killed or injured in accidents caused by the fraudulent parts. Congressman Williams, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, addressed Maya directly. Captain Rodriguez, your investigation revealed a pattern of corruption that had been hidden from military leadership for years. What motivated you to pursue this investigation despite clear resistance from your superiors? Maya looked out at the audience, seeing faces she recognized: pilots from her network, family members of accident victims, reporters who had been following the story. Sir, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution and to bear true faith and allegiance to the United States. That oath doesn't have exceptions for when it's convenient or politically safe. Captain, you risked your career to expose this fraud. Some would say you were insubordinate, that you should have followed proper channels. Maya's response was measured and clear. Sir, proper channels only work when the people in charge of those channels aren't part of the problem. When the system fails, individual people have to step up and do what's right. The hearing made Maya a reluctant celebrity within military circles. Stories about her investigation appeared in military publications, aviation magazines, and mainstream media outlets. She was invited to speak at conferences, consulted by investigators, and approached by other service members who had concerns about their own units. But Maya's moment of public recognition was overshadowed by a personal tragedy that would change the direction of her life once again. During a routine training flight at Randolph, her closest friend and fellow pilot, Captain Jessica Martinez, was killed when her aircraft's engine failed during takeoff. The preliminary investigation suggested mechanical failure, but Maya's trained eye immediately spotted the signs of the same fraudulent parts that had caused so many other accidents. The official investigation into Martinez's death was perfunctory and inconclusive. The aircraft was declared a total loss, the engine components were too damaged to analyze definitively, and the case was closed as mechanical failure of undetermined cause. Maya knew that the investigation had been deliberately limited to avoid uncovering more evidence of the corruption that was still ongoing despite the congressional hearings. Maya requested permission to conduct her own investigation into the accident, but her request was denied. She was told that the matter was closed and that any further inquiry would be considered insubordination. For the first time in her career, Maya felt the full weight of the military bureaucracy pressing down on her, trying to silence her, just as it had silenced so many others. That night, sitting in her apartment, looking at a photograph of herself and Martinez from their training days, Maya made a decision that would surprise everyone who knew her. Instead of fighting the system from within, instead of continuing to bang her head against the wall of institutional resistance, she submitted her resignation from the Air Force. Maya's resignation letter was brief and professional, stating simply that she was pursuing opportunities outside the military. She gave no interviews, made no public statements, and refused to discuss her reasons for leaving with anyone except her immediate family. To the outside world, it appeared that Captain Maya Rodriguez had simply decided that civilian life offered better prospects than a military career, but Maya hadn't given up. She had evolved. Within a month of leaving the Air Force, she had established Rodriguez Aviation Consulting, a private firm that specialized in aircraft safety inspections and maintenance auditing. Her first clients were small civilian operators who couldn't afford the major consulting firms but needed expert analysis of their aircraft and procedures. Maya approached civilian aviation with the same methodical precision she had brought to military flying. She studied federal aviation regulations, learned the civilian aircraft certification process, and became certified as an independent aviation safety inspector. Her military experience gave her credibility with pilots and mechanics, while her investigation background made her invaluable to insurance companies and legal firms dealing with aircraft accidents. The work was satisfying in ways that military service had never been. When Maya identified a safety problem in civilian aviation, she could address it directly without navigating layers of bureaucracy and political considerations. When she recommended changes to maintenance procedures or operational protocols, Her clients implemented them because they understood that safety meant survival in the unforgiving world of commercial aviation. Maya's reputation in civilian aviation grew quickly. She was known for her thoroughness, her technical expertise, and her willingness to deliver bad news when aircraft or procedures didn't meet safety standards. Pilots and operators learned that when Maya Rodriguez signed off on an aircraft, it was genuinely safe to fly. When she recommended grounding an aircraft, smart operators listened.